everybody, it's Romania Black, and I went on a vacation, and then I came back, and there were a ton of comments for chapters 39, 41, 45, 47, 48, 49. I was like, ah! So I got really excited because everybody had lots to say as we were getting near the end of Volume 2, and now we're on Volume 3 of Thousand Autumns, and guess what? We are getting in to new content today. I have been waiting for months now through 2 volumes. I have been, not that I didn't like volumes 1 and 2. I loved volumes 1 and 2, but I'd watched the donghua, so I knew what was going to happen. It's all brand new territory now. We didn't even, we barely cracked the surface, and now this is like uncharted territories. I am so excited to see what is going to happen now that Shen Qiao has taken Yan Wushi away, and Yan Wushi is not dead apparently, and now we have to do things. So I'm really excited. So I can't wait to see what's going to happen, but I want to talk first about all the comments that you left over on Patreon and on YouTube. So thank you for that. There's quite a bit to talk about, so we need to just dive in. This is going to be a long intro, so bear with me. I might have to do a timestamp or something so you all know when it starts, the actual novel discussion. But Jamie T691, back in chapters 39 through 41, said about the book's title, in Chinese poetry, the character for autumn is often used to represent a year, and 1,000 is often used to represent a number too great to count, like infinity. So the title refers to infinite years, or basically eternity. The idea of these two being eternally tied together, there's so much that could be happening with this. I'm really excited. I don't know what's going to happen with the title, but that's really good to know. So thank you, Jamie, for pointing that out. D-I-I-Z Zyrix says for chapters 45 to 47, to think that Yan Wushi's betrayal was kind of like UI's, incapacitating Shen Qiao before he faced a powerful enemy. And still, Shen Qiao didn't cry over his childhood friend and his betrayal, but he did cry over Yan Wushi's. Just saying! Did Yan Wushi give Shen Qiao to the bad guy as an experiment to see if Shen Qiao could achieve a breakthrough and merge the daoist and demonic cores in a life or death situation? Did Yan Wushi have a last bit hope that Shen Qiao could become his rival or surpass him? Or was he simply an asshole and traded Shen Qiao for his sword? Based on the audio drama from last week, I'm going to say it's not the latter. My personal belief is that he had faith that Shen Qiao would be able to rise above. Now, was it still a dick move? Yeah, it kind of was, and he needs to help be accountable for it, but I don't think he was just being a jerk. I think that he was like, I'm going to be a jerk and do this, but there was other motives behind it as well, so, you know. Anyway, so then Yezhan Li for 592 for chapters 48 through 49 says, I don't know if people have mentioned this before, but Chuyi and Shiwu are significant dates in the Chinese lunar calendar that essentially mean the 1st and 15th days of each month. In Taoism, deities or ancestral worship rituals are often done on these 2 days of the month. But of course, the specific traditions and ways of worship differ for each family, even more so in modern times. For Buddhists, these 2 days of each month are the days where vegetarian meals are prepared and eaten instead of the usual meals. I like that the author kind of weaves in that tradition and that culture in the names. So it's not just the names have a meaning, but they're tied to a ritual and they're both together as the priests for the abbot. I thought that was really cool. I like that. So thank you. Sunray 535 kind of continues on with this, saying, I don't know what's up with the donghua being scared of mentioning other countries by their past names. It's probably with the government and the censorship. Censorship is the best guess. They did this with Turkey and Mongolia, who are the Gokturks, and now Korea. Goryeo was one of the 3 individual states before it became unified to become Korea. I forgot how much pre-Korea was mentioned in this chapter set. I looked up Goryeo to see why the author made a point to choose a pre-Korean state specifically to be involved, and it looks like Goryeo was a vassal state of a Mongolia Khaganate roughly 10,000 years after the setting of this historical fiction novel. In previous comments on guessing what the novel's interpretation of who the Gokturks were, I think I brought up Mongolia as a possibility. If it's true, the novel interprets Mongolia as the Gokturks, that's a smooth tie-in with the novel's historical plot points. It also seems the author condensed the timeline down so that Goryeo can exist during China's northern and southern period, which the novel was set in. Goryeo used classical Chinese in their literary works, so the Bija sect members who became affiliated with Goryeo should have no problem on the linguistic aspect to communicate there. I'm really honestly baffled and amazed that the author has done so much historical context in this story, and the one thing I do regret reading this is because it's so historically affiliated. I feel like because I'm not from China, I have not grown up with Chinese fantasy and novels, I do miss out on a lot of the context that a Chinese audience member would get or pick up on. But that's why the comments exist, and that's why you all send these comments to tell me these things. So thank you, Sunray. Chewy, for chapters 50 to 52, say, I like to think that Shen Qiao is so paternal to Shiwu because that's exactly how Chi Fengge was with him, and that's who he takes on as a role model and an example of a good Shizun. The fact that Shen Qiao is trying to be like his Shizun with Shiwu is absolutely adorable, and I loved all the chapters. Chapters 50 and 52, 40, basically 48 through 52, those chapters were all fantastic. I loved those chapters to round out volume 2. And then Be Happy, our moderator, says for chapters 58 to 52, Shen Qiao's resilience and kind of steel under silk persona. I love that description. Is absolutely amazing to watch and follow. No wonder Yan Wushi is so puzzled and flustered about someone that doesn't correspond to his data about human nature. Oh, right? Exactly. Right. That's exactly how it is. Like Yan Wushi's like, I don't understand. How can you be this saintly? And Shen Qiao's just like, baby, I was born this way. But I love that descriptor of steel under silk. That's so perfect. It fits him to a T. I love it. So thank you all so much for bearing with me while I read those comments. But I've had so much fun. I'm glad that we've gotten to this point because everybody's like, all right, we're getting to the meat of the story, as it were. And now we've entered the past donghua. Like, we're going in the wild, y'all. We're going in the wild into uncharted waters. And I'm so freaking excited. So today we're going to be looking at chapters 56, 57, and 58. And they correspond with audio drama episode 14. So I will be reading the chapters out loud from this section of the novel. And then I'll be taking a break. I'll be listening to the audio drama. And then we'll be coming back and we're going to be talking about what we just read and any other details that I didn't talk about during the reading. Okay, so we are going to get started here with Thousand Autumns, chapters 56 through 58, and we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and oh my gosh, I'm so excited! Let's go! Chapter 56, Rescue! The movement was too sudden. Even Shen Qiao was thoroughly stunned. Since even Guangling-san had been so assured as to stroll off, it was obvious that Yan Wushi's chances of survival had been slim to none. In truth, he shouldn't even be alive at all. Shen Qiao was already prepared to bury him and erect a grave marker. He never expected something like this. There was little force in Yan Wushi's grip, and it was as if he had exhausted all his strength with that one action. As soon as his hand landed on Shen Qiao's, he let go and made no further movements. His eyes were still tightly closed, a lifeless gray pallor cast over his pale face. Blood still trickled from his body. Shen Qiao had never seen such a wretched state before. It was as if that motion just now was his only final struggle against the clutches of death. Shen Qiao felt for Yan Wushi's heart. Just as he expected, the entire expanse beneath his palm was as cold as ice, without a shred of warmth. Shen Qiao attempted to pass a wisp of true qi into his body, and it immediately vanished into nothingness, as if he'd cast a clod of mud into the sea. He untied Yan Wushi's hair and ran his fingers through the strands. Very quickly, he arrived at the area around the Baihu acupoint, and there he found an obvious crack. An ordinary person would have certainly perished from an injury like this, but one could not argue that Yan Wushi was ordinary after all. He'd fought 1 against 5, and his opponents were 5 of the greatest martial artists in the world. There was even Buddhist Master Zhu Ting, yet Yan Wushi had been able to hold his own, even with a grandmaster like that among them. Though Shen Qiao had arrived a step too late to personally witness that fierce battle himself, he could imagine how marvelously incomparable it must have been. The crack wasn't long, but it was very deep. The attacker must have used all of their strength. He pondered that blow. Even though it was Yan Wushi, even if it hadn't ruptured his brain itself, it must have shattered his skull, leaving him no chance of survival. So that's the move that Do, our frat boy, Liu Guild leader, that was his blow. Shen Qiao wasn't a doctor. He was completely helpless when faced with such a severe injury. He could only release Yan Wushi's hand and begin probing the meridians of his body while carefully supporting the back of his neck. His bones weren't broken. His meridians were intact. The fatal injury had been caused by a sword piercing through his chest, which was Yuai's, together with those palm strikes that had gravely damaged his internal organs, which was Yuting, I believe. Finally, there was the wound on his head, the straw that broke the camel's back. The more Shen Qiao examined him, the lower his heart sank. Was there really no way to save him? Then suddenly he gave a sound of surprise. A sound so faint, only he could hear it. But it was a sound that betrayed just how surprised Shen Qiao was inside. For he'd discovered that within Yan Wushi's dantian, which should have been long gone cold and been shattered, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible wisp of qi still quietly circulating there. Be nice. He thought for a moment, then decided to simply pull Yan Wushi's arm up and tug the man right onto his back and head forward step by step. So he's like, there's a tiny chance he could live, and I'm not going to squander this opportunity. To Shen Qiao, the royal capital of Oooooohhhhh was an unfamiliar location. Wind-carrying sand was said to blow here all year round, and while the Gobi Desert stretched in all directions, the only city of any scale within dozens of miles of this area was the oasis where the royal capital was located. However, as one had to pass through here on the way to various nations of the western regions like Kocho and Khotan, it was impossible for the population to be entirely concentrated within the royal capital. Upon leaving the capital and heading west, if they looked down and into the distance, they'd find thinly scattered villages and houses everywhere. The Gobi Desert was boundless, and even caverns to shelter from the sandstorms were rare. Not to mention that Shen Qiao was carrying what was basically a living corpse. Even resolving the issue of food and water was a massive problem. It was impossible to just search for a concealed cavern to hide in like the Central Plains. No matter how much he didn't want to be found, he had no choice but to first find a place where people lived, yet which was far removed from the Xionghu, and stay there. Shen Qiao squinted for a long moment beneath the blinding sunlight, and then finally chose a location in the distance. He headed in that direction, carrying Yan Wushi. So it seems like the donghua was trying to pay homage to that by having Shen Qiao carrying him from the cave back, even though the novel changed that, and now we can kind of see why. Okay. So, Shen Qiao brought Yan Wushi to a village next to Jialing Lake. Several dozen households were established there, and the main road often used by traveling merchants lay nearby. The occasional traveler would come by and stay, hence it wasn't too bustling, but it was also not too remote, at least not so much that they'd be hostile to an outsider like Shen Qiao. The royal capital of Oooooohhhh had been being populated with all sorts of people, was absolutely not somewhere that they could remain. His only options lay near the small scattered villages around it. Shen Qiao chose this location primarily out of consideration for Yan Wushi's current state. If he still had a chance of survival, and Shen Qiao managed to save him, then for the time being such news could not be leaked. Yan Wushi had enemies everywhere. If someone like Guang Lingsong knew that Yan Wushi had survived, he'd definitely rush over and kill them both. Even if Qi Fengge wasn't able to fend off that many martial artists by himself, well, let alone Shen Qiao, who'd only recovered little more than half of his martial arts. As night crept close, the village houses all lit lamps one after the other, and Shen Qiao, carrying Yan Wushi, knocked on the door of one such house. A young lady answered it. She wore a red dress and a long braid draped over her shoulder. As it was common for locals, long years beneath the sun had tanned her skin a soft bronze, but her features were neither rough nor ugly. She must have been prone to smiling, for whenever the corners of her lips pulled up, two dimples would appear on her cheeks. It was quite adorable. Shen Qiao told her of his reason for knocking. His friend was injured, so he wished to stay here for a while to let him recuperate, and once he was better, they would leave. They absolutely would not give the host any trouble. Though currency from the Central Plains was also accepted here, on the outskirts people were more accustomed to bartering. So Shen Qiao took out a large chunk of salt and a small, delicately wrought flower of gold. Within the Central Plains, an ornament like this could be purchased at any jewelry shop, but it was a rare sight here. Zhao Jiying had gotten the disciples at her sect to prepare it for Shen Qiao before he left, and unexpectedly, it really did come in handy. It was obvious the girl was used to merchants asking for lodging, but she hadn't expected the door knocker this time to be such a handsome man. As she listened to him speak, his expression pleasant and smiling, her face grew a little hot and her gaze was captured by the golden flower. But she still didn't agree right away. Using a mix of her local Qiang language and some awkward Mandarin, along with a few hand gestures, she told Shen Qiao that she lived together with her grandfather, and so she had to ask him first. Shen Qiao expressed his understanding and waited outside with Yan Wushi on his back. He thought he'd have to wait a long time, but not long after the door opened again. An old man with silvery hair came out, and with the girl following behind him. The old man was fluent in Mandarin. He asked Shen Qiao a couple of questions before opening the door to let them in. After a brief conversation, Shen Qiao learned that this old man had once lived in the Central Plains when he was young. While there, he'd saved some money, then built the largest house within this city. Unfortunately, his son and daughter-in-law had passed early, leaving him with only a granddaughter to live with. Shen Qiao had chosen this family because of their large courtyard and many rooms. This way, even if he needed to pass qi to heal Yan Wushi's injuries, they could avoid any unnecessary attention from others. The old man had seen and learned so much in his long life, he showed no surprise at the sight of a weapon carrier like Shen Qiao. Instead, it was the girl, Bana, who showed deep curiosity in Shen Qiao's daoist clothing. She stood behind her grandfather staring intently, but every time Shen Qiao looked over at her, she would lower her head a little bashful. After exchanging a few courteous words, the old man hesitantly said, "My old self often receives traveling merchants for a stay, and as a guest you've come from afar, so of course we welcome you. But this friend of yours seems to be injured quite badly. I fear his enemies must be terribly strong. My granddaughter and I are but ordinary people, and we've never done anything to invite trouble upon ourselves. Please, I ask that the Taoist master please tell me the truth so I can make my decision." "I'll be honest with you," said Shen Qiao. "This friend of mine has indeed invited quite a bit of trouble upon himself. Currently all his enemies think him dead, but I wish to save him. Unfortunately, the Central Plains are too far away, and we won't be able to make it back right away. Hence, we have no choice but to ask your esteemed self for hospitality. As long as no one knows he's here, my friend will be safe. If anything goes wrong, I'll leave with him immediately. We won't bring you any trouble." The old man continued to hesitate, but Bana tugged on the corner of his clothes. "Grandpa, this gentleman doesn't look like a bad man. They're in a bad spot. If we're able to help, we should help." When he saw his granddaughter speaking up for them, the old man sighed. "Very well. If that's the case, the two of you may stay here. We will also keep your identities secret from everyone else. I'll just tell them that you're traveling scholars from the Central Plains. I also ask the Taoist master not to make too many trips outside unless it's absolutely necessary. That way, there will be less trouble for us." Shen Qiao was deeply grateful. Ever since the tragedy that befell the abbot and Shuyi, he was completely adamant about not involving innocent people unless there truly was no other choice, so naturally he thanked the man profusely. He only intended to stay a short while. Once the Quailing Dragon assembly was over and the martial artists left, he could take Yan Wushi back to Chang'an and hand him to Bian Yanmei. Bana was a little taken with Shen Qiao and wanted to speak with him more. When she saw him walking to the side courtyard carrying Yan Wushi, she took the initiative to help him open the door, but her finger accidentally brushed Yan Wushi's arm in the process. The chilling cold of his body startled her immediately. She stumbled back a few steps and then pointed to him in shock. Shen Longjun, the person you're carrying, is he really alive?" Shen Qiao smiled wryly to himself, thinking that he also didn't know whether he was still alive. But he could only comfort her and say, "It's just a very serious injury, one which has caused him to stop breathing for the time being. He's not dead." Bana left, not quite convinced. The few times she saw Yan Wushi afterward, he always appeared well and truly dead. Even though his body didn't rot or stink like normal corpses, it was ice cold from head to toe, and there was no sign of life to be seen. The most terrifying thing was that once, when Shen Qiao wasn't paying attention, she'd placed her fingers beneath his nose, and she couldn't feel his slightest breath at all. She almost suspected that Shen Qiao was so grief-stricken by his friend's death that he refused to accept reality. But this served as an advantage to Shen Qiao. It meant that other than delivering him meals twice a day, she no longer paid their side yard any periodic visits. This saved Shen Qiao some trouble as, given his disposition, he really had no idea how he'd wave her off otherwise. With everything settled, Shen Qiao could give his full attention to examining Yan Wushi's situation. Day after day, little by little, the true qi in Yan Wushi's dantian seemed to grow. It truly seemed he had a chance. It was obvious this was the Zhuyang strategy's true qi working its magic within Yan Wushi's body, just like it had done for Shen Qiao. But the difference was that Yan Wushi hadn't lost his martial arts, so he couldn't do as Shen Qiao had, destroy everything and rebuild from scratch. His fatal injuries weren't the result of ruined foundations either. One could rebuild their foundations, but to repair one's skull after cracking it open? Now that was unheard of. If Yan Wushi remained like this, in the end, he'd be still unable to escape death. Shen Qiao thought, and he could only come up with one solution. Ooh, okay. Oh, Yan Wushi, if you only knew that this man was working to save your life. Oh. Chapter 57, the Royal Capital. Do Yanshan had put his full strength into that strike, and it was out of question for him to show any mercy. Not only had it split Yan Wushi's skull, but also the bigger problem was that the contents had suffered severe damage. After mulling it over, the only route open to Shen Qiao was to first use his internal energy and true qi to dissolve the blood clots within Yan Wushi's brain. Oh my god! What you been a brain surgeon? McSteamy over here? Shen Qiao McSteamy? Then slowly reorient the injured meridians all over his body, as well as repair his organs. Whether Yan Wushi would really wake up again, or if he'd linger in this half-dead state for the rest of his life, would be up to heaven. As he sat there racking his brains for a solution, the man remained completely unconscious, his eyes closed and breaths faint, totally unaware of day and night. Shen Qiao glanced at him, sighing quietly, and again smiled bitterly. A small foreign village was naturally limited when it came to food, but it was 2 meals a day, mostly lamb and fried flatbread. But Shen Qiao had always been adaptable. He ate whatever they sent and never complained. Yan Wushi's situation was more complicated. Insensate as he was, at most he could only drink some soup. However, his jaw was tightly clenched, and his tongue blocked the entrance to his throat. Spoon-feeding him the soup was futile. Even if Shen Qiao forcefully poured it into his mouth, it would just dribble out from the corners. Special tools existed for feeding medicine, but finding one in the small Tu-Yuhun village was impossible. Left with no other choice, Shen Qiao can only take a sip of the soup first, then pry open Yan Wushi's jaw and feed it to him, mouth to mouth. He used his tongue to hold the other man's down and forced the soup into him. Like this, he managed to make him drink 1 or 2 mouthfuls with great difficulty. Okay. All right, nope, calm down. Mind out of the gutter. We're fine. This is fine. Everything's fine. This is great. This will not be misconstrued by anyone in any way at any time. Okay. Yan Wushi was recovering at an incredibly slow pace. The true qi in his dantian never vanished, but it was latent and feeble, sometimes discernible, sometimes hidden, like a candle flame flickering in the wind that could be snuffed out at any moment. And Shen Qiao's own martial prowess had yet to fully recover, so he could only channel qi for Yan Wushi once a day. He was just at the end of his rope with Yan Wushi's situation. At this point, he was mostly just trying anything and everything to see what would stick. This once willful, once egotistical man who'd been overflowing with arrogance could now only lie upon a bed, completely at the mercy of others. Even that shadow of a smile that always hung at the corner of his lips was gone. All that remained of his handsome face was just that, the handsome beauty. All those other quirks that people associated with him as a grand master of the demonic discipline had completely vanished. There was only still the white peppering his temples, impossible to wipe away, and the docility upon his face incongruous enough to make others mistake his identity. How the tables had turned. Even Yan Wushi himself probably never thought that he could fall into such dire straits. That being said, from what Shen Qiao knew about this man, even if Yan Wushi had long anticipated an ambush, there was a high chance he'd shown up to the battle anyway. To others, an ambush like that was a calamity they'd avoid like the plague, but to Yan Wushi, it was a rare and exciting fight. His miscalculation lay in his overconfidence. He believed there was no way he could lose, that even if he was outmatched, he could still leave easily. He hadn't foreseen that Guangling-san, another demonic practitioner like him, was so determined to involve himself to eliminate Yan Wushi that he'd even divulged the flaw of the Fanglin scripture's demonic core to outsiders. There was no medicinal ingredients to brew. All Yan Wushi could rely on was the wisp of true qi that Shen Qiao had passed to him. But on the fourth day, his breath suddenly weakened to the point of being inaudible. Shen Qiao, too, thought that the continuing like this was hopeless. Even if the other man still had a chance to survive, dragging out this half-dead state would still conclude with his life being extinguished. Shen Qiao held the soup bowl, his brow slightly furrowed as he pondered for a long time. Then, he saw suddenly that Yan Wushi's eyelids seemed to tremble. It was such a tiny motion. He almost thought he'd seen wrong. Sec Leader Yan. Shen Qiao tried calling his name several times, but sure enough, there was no response. He picked up the man's wrist. The pulse was so faint it was almost imperceptible. If Shen Qiao hadn't probed it carefully, he would have seemed no different than a corpse. For some reason, a feeling of absurdity suddenly surged within Shen Qiao. That day, Yan Wushi had personally delivered him to Song Jingjing and forced him to the edge of the precipice. He probably never thought then that he'd end up where he was today, and definitely not that he'd end up completely at someone else's mercy. If Shen Qiao hadn't shown up with how Guangling-san and Dao Yanshan had handled matters, Yan Wushi would have long been decapitated. Not even the great immortals of Dalo Mountain could come back to life after that. Even at this moment, Shen Qiao only needed to land another palm strike on the crown of his head or his heart, and that would be enough to transform this half-dead man into a fully dead one. But finally, after quietly staring at him for a long time, Shen Qiao only gave a sigh, then raised his head to take another mouthful of soup. Supporting Yan Wushi by the nape of his neck, he gripped his chin and forced his mouth open, and then slowly passed the broth to him bit by bit. Having repeated these actions for several days, Shen Qiao was already carrying them out with precise ease and practiced ease. As he was a pure-hearted Daoist, and he was doing it to save a life, he naturally felt not the slightest bit of embarrassment or inappropriateness. However, another person seeing this might not feel the same way. Bana was taken with Shen Qiao. Even if she was terrified of Yan Wushi's corpse-like state, she still stubbornly insisted on delivering their 2 meals a day herself, all so that Shen Qiao could open the door and they could exchange a couple of words there. Though there was a language barrier, she was satisfied with this. She thought this was going to be Love Actually. Today, she brought over lunch as usual, but for some reason, perhaps because the plates were a bit heavy, she didn't feel like knocking. Instead, she carefully shouldered the door open and walked the familiar path through the side yard and into the inner room. The door to the inner room was open, and the result was that she saw a scene that left her gaping and tongue-tied. Shen Qiao was bent at the waist, gripping the alive dead man's chin as he pressed their mouths together. He was completely unconcerned that Bana had walked in. Beneath the binding and blinding sunlight, she could even see their tongues briefly intertwined. Oh my God! To be more precise, Shen Qiao's tongue was prying apart Yan Wushi's teeth, and then pushing inside as far as it could go, all so that he could successfully pass the soup into Yan Wushi's mouth. But the other party was basically a living corpse, completely insensate. Even with the efforts, both broth and saliva still dribbled down from the corner of Yan Wushi's mouth. The people of the western regions were more open-minded, and Bana was both beautiful and young. She was very popular with the boys in the village, but in all the years of her life, she had never seen such an intimate interaction with a man. Now she stared at them, her face burning and her heart thumping, her mouth dry. For a long time, she was frozen stiff. You're gonna give us this as the picture? Oh my God! Ah! The crazy part is, it's not really romantic. He's trying to save this man's life. But damn, Yan Wushi looks pretty damn good right there. Oh my God. Ah, Bana, you poor girl. Oh my God. Oh my God. Having been in the middle of feeding Yan Wushi soup, Shen Qiao had not expected Bana to suddenly come in at all. He could only finish passing him the mouthful before putting the bowl down, and then he greeted Bana's flustered crimson face. Bana's lovely eyes were faintly red, and she asked him in her awkward Mandarin, "So you liked him, and that's why you refused to let me come close and refused to accept my affections?" This misreading was really too massive. Shen Qiao gave a strained smile. "You don't have any feeding tools here, so I could only feed him soup this way. We don't even count as friends. I asked the maiden not to misunderstand us." Dubious. Bana said, "Then why won't Sheng Lanjun accept me? Is it because I'm not as pretty as the girls from your Central Plains? Or is it because I'm not as gentle or ladylike as them? Please tell me, I can learn." Shen Qiao had never thought that he could attract another bout of romantic troubles just by staying here for a couple of days. If it had been a woman from the Central Plains instead, she'd never have said it so frankly, even if she had fallen in love at first sight. But Bana had no such considerations. If she liked someone, she naturally had to confess early. Otherwise, once the man returned to the Central Plains, they'd never be able to meet again, and it'd be too late to even cry. Shen Qiao patiently explained to her, "As a daoist priest, I must remain unmarried my entire life." Bana wasn't swayed. Grandpa said the daoist priest can return to the secular world. She's gonna call you out on your bullshit! She's gonna call you out! She'd actually come well prepared. Shen Qiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Well, all he could say was, "You're 14 years old this year. But I'm already past my prime." There you go. The gap between our ages is too large. "What does that mean, prime?" asked Bana. "I'm about 30 years old." Oh, here we go. Bana gasped. "You're already 30 years old? I couldn't tell at all." "The lifespan of martial artists will always be somewhat longer," said Shen Qiao. Bana bit her lip. "Then, when I am 50 years old, will you still look like this?" Shen Qiao shook his head and pointed to Yan Wushi. "How can that be? I'm not an ageless immortal. At that point, I'll probably look like him." Is he assuming that Yan Wushi is 50? Oh my god! I mean, maybe he is. Maybe he is. Maybe there is that age gap. Maybe there is that gap. But I mean, 30 and 50 is better than 30 and 14, by and large. We'll talk about this in the discussion. Bana looked at Yan Wushi. Other than the peppering of white at his temples, she only saw a fantastically handsome face. There was no trace of aging to speak of. She asked in a trembling voice, "Well, how old is he?" Shen Qiao thought for a moment and then said doubtfully, "Less than 50, probably?" Bana was shocked stiff, as if she'd been struck by lightning on a clear day. The western regions were full of wind and sand, so all the village men who were in their 40s or 50s possessed faces that were creased and weather-beaten. How could they even compare to Yan Wushi? Putting aside men, women aged even faster. Once they passed 30, they'd begin to put on weight, their wrinkles deepening. Bana knew that she was young and beautiful now, but what about in 10 or 20 years later? The idea of her beloved remaining as handsome as ever while she was already old and gray, it was unbearable. The poor girl had just experienced her first bout of adolescent love and had already run into this kind of unresolvable problem. She was immediately beside herself with distress, and her sheer dejection went without saying. With tears in her eyes, Bana shoved the plates of food into his arms and sniffled, "It's fine. Buddha sent you to me, but he refused to bring us together. It's obvious we're not meant to be. I hope this his esteemed self blesses the two of you so you can grow old together." Shen Qiao did not know how to respond. Despite being stuck in this awkward situation, he was forced to call back Bana, who was hiding her face and about to leave, ready to find somewhere to soothe her emotional wounds. "I need to leave for half a day and will be taking a trip to the city," he said. "If someone comes asking questions, you can just pretend that you know nothing. But if his enemies come knocking for him and there's really nothing you can do, just hand him over to them. Prioritize protecting yourselves first. There's no need for you to risk your lives for him." Bana wiped at her tears. "Does he have a lot of enemies?" Shen Qiao nodded. "He does have quite a few." Bana was full of worry. "Then isn't being together with him terribly dangerous for you?" This girl was pure and sincere. She spoke whatever came to her mind. She liked Shen Qiao, and so she told him directly. She was deeply hurt by his rejection, but when she heard that Yan Wushi had many enemies, she immediately began worrying for Shen Qiao instead. The hearts of those in the secular world were treacherous, more frightening than the gods and demons themselves. But it was because there was sincerity to be found within treachery that the sincerity became all the more precious. Warmth flooded Shen Qiao's heart, and he consoled her. "I know my limits, so I'll be fine. but I'm afraid of dragging you two into this, so you must be careful. He and Yan Wushi had been staying in the small village for the past few days. They received little news here, and so he had to take a trip to the royal capital. If those Zhangqiu practitioners were gone, he could also take Yan Wushi to Chang'an and hand him to Bian Yanmei soon. The demonic sects had many secret techniques, so perhaps Bian Yanmei had a method to save his Shizun. After saying his temporary farewells to Bana and her grandfather, Shen Qiao returned to the capital. It was as bustling as ever, with people coming and going. The Coiling Dragon Assembly had just finished yesterday, and the emotions of many were still running high. The inn was full of people discussing this year's assembly. Shen Qiao sat in the corner without anyone's notice, a cloak ubiquitous to the desert over his Daoist robes, its hood concealing his face and his hair. In his search for information, he specially chose the largest and most active inn in the capital. He ordered a jar of wine and several tails of meat, and then quietly listened to the great assortment of voices. "Did you hear? The Tai sword has an owner now. Someone purchased it for 20,000 gold. With those words, a flood of exclamations rose all around him. That person must be mad, or they have nowhere to spend their money. Tai may be a famous sword, but it's only a little sharper than average. How could it be worth that much money? The first person laughed. Of course there's a reason. The buyer was Qi's Duke of Penchong County, Qin Gong. The others immediately understood. Then that's no surprise. Tai was once Chu's symbol of a benevolent rule. He must want to give it to the Emperor of Qi. Hearing this, someone gave a mocking laugh. Qi is about to be destroyed. Will Tai grant them divine protection? Who knows? I heard Qin Gong is a sycophant who won his seat by flattering the Lord of Qi. If Qi's destroyed, he'll likely lose both his life and his possessions. He's probably just clutching at whatever straw he can, making some last-ditch efforts in hope that they'll save him. These words had just fallen when a group of people walked in. The leader was tall and dressed in splendid finery. Though his face wasn't particularly handsome, there was a bold vigor about him that even his clothes couldn't conceal. He glanced around him after entering, gave a slight nod, and his attendants smoothly came up to arrange for his seating and dishes. His pomp and mannerisms immediately differentiated him from the Zhangqiu practitioners crowding the place. Speak of the devil, and he will appear. The people who'd been excitedly talking about him just a moment ago all felt a little awkward, and they immediately quieted down. Among the people peeking at Qin Gong, Shen Qiao shot him a glance from the corner too, without any change in his expression. If not for the fact that he could vaguely make out the profile he'd once known from his face, or the whispers buzzing beside him going, "The man himself is here, keep quiet," Shen Qiao would never have made the connection between this young noble, so arrogant and reserved, and the boy from that dilapidated temple in the past. It wasn't that long ago, you know? Even without knowing his identity, the innkeeper understood that this was an important customer whom he must not offend. Together with his waiters, he deftly cleaned up several tables previous customers had used, and he led Qin Gong to his seat with a face full of smiles. As soon as Qin Gong and his men were seated, another group of people entered the door. Shen Qiao took a quick glance and frowned. Feeling this was really too much of a coincidence, he pulled the hood lower over his forehead. I and Do Yanshan were at the same table. Oh my god, Shen Qiao, you picked the worst place to come to! The former had come alone, and there were no disciples of Zhangdu Mountain with him, but the latter had brought several members of the Liuhe Guild. Two of them looked somewhat familiar. They seemed to be the Hu brothers that Shen Qiao had met by chance at the Chuyun Temple. But his vision was still lacking, and he was afraid that they'd notice if he looked too long, so he quickly lowered his head to savor his alcohol, patiently waiting for everyone to leave. Okay, so his vision is still not great, but good enough he can recognize Ui and Do. Oh my god. The inns outside the Great Wall were less particular. Even the royal capital's best and biggest relay station didn't have private rooms. Instead, everyone was crammed into one hall, which made for quite a noisy scene. Everyone spoke at once, so naturally those with loud voices would be heard more. Qin Gong was here, and he'd brought many great attendants. Even the martial artists of the Zhangqiu wouldn't want to make enemies for themselves for no reason, beyond a few scant troublemakers. So the topic of Tai's sword was over, and it was natural for everyone to bring up other pieces of shocking news, one that had already been mentioned countless times in the past few days. Say, do you think Yan Wushi is really dead? Judging from his voice, the speaker wasn't a noteworthy martial artist, nor was he from a powerful sect. When he uttered the name Yan Wushi, he subconsciously lowered his volume, like he was terrified that Yan Wushi would do as Qin Gong had and suddenly materialize before them in the flesh. It was obvious that Yan Wushi's name carried extraordinary impact. The moment the first man brought it up, their surroundings fell into a temporary silence, just like they did when Qinggong had entered. It was a few moments before someone replied, "It should be true. I heard the sect leader Yu and guild leader Do were also part of the ambush, and they're right here now. If you don't believe it, you can ask them." In the past, whenever those from the Zhanghu heard Yan Wushi's name, their hearts would give an inevitable tremble. But these days, after the news of him being ambushed and killed by 5 martial artists had spread, it actually incurred more dissent. A single man had been ambushed and killed by 5 experts. What did that mean? In other words, those 5 had doubted their ability in beating him one-on-one. To kill one Yan Wushi, they had to go as far as joining forces. The strong is king was the law of the Zhanghu. Though many were relieved at the news, there were many that also secretly admired Yan Wushi because of it. They thought that if he hadn't died, he probably could have succeeded Qi Fengge as the foremost martial artist in all the land. Most people didn't dare say such things, but there were a few who couldn't stop running their mouths. One such person immediately declared loudly, "A victory through superior numbers goes against the morals of the Zhanghu. What a pity that a grandmaster like Yan Wushi would die in such an unjust way." Yui shot him a cold glance, but said nothing. However, Do Yanshan lightly flicked his finger, and the speaker yelped, then covered his mouth, his expression twisting in pain. His friend went pale with shock and leapt to his feet. "Oh, Oolong, are you all right?" Then he cupped his hands at Dao Yanshan. "I beg guild leader Dao's pardon. This brother of mine is always running his mouth. After a couple of drinks, he starts blabbering nonsense, so I ask you not to hold it against him." Dao Yanshan chortled. "What you eat is your business, but what you say is ours. I only knocked out one of his front teeth as a small lesson. I've already shown him mercy." Sure enough, as Dao Yanshan spoke, the man in question spat out a mouthful of bloody foam, along with a tooth. Dissatisfied anger was written all over his face, and he looked about ready to retort, but his friend quickly covered his mouth and snapped, "Oolong, stop causing trouble!" That man could only shut his mouth awkwardly. His companion forcefully hauled him up, and the two of them left in a hurry. After this little interlude, no one dared to speak carelessly again. The Liu Guild conducted business across the entire land. Offending Qinggong would at most net you a beating and an entry ban from Qi, but offending the Liu Guild, you never knew when you might have entered their territory or used items that they had escorted. However, it was impossible to suppress that many mouths. After a brief silence, some people rose and left, and the new customers entered through the door. Noise and clamor once again rose, and the topic of Yan Wushi's death was an unavoidable one. And this was still a location outside the Great Wall. Once it spread to the Central Plains, who knew how many waves and problems it would stir up? "Since Yan Wushi is dead, isn't Shen Qiao in trouble?" This voice came from close to Shen Qiao, and it wasn't loud. The speaker was likely talking to their friend. "Why do you say that?" "Well, didn't Shen Qiao lose all his martial arts and end up forced to rely on Yan Wushi? He became his kept man, right? Now that he's lost his backer, what good awaits a cripple like him? Surely he doesn't have the face to return to Zhangdu Mountain and beg them to take him back." These people obviously didn't know that it had been a long time since Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi had shown up together. Their information was still frozen back in the time of the Sioux resident banquet when Shen Qiao had attended it on Yan Wushi's behalf. That's true. He probably doesn't have the guts to go back. Didn't Zhangdu Mountain already put their notice out that Shen Qiao was no longer their sect leader? But they never announced Shen Qiao's expulsion. They must still care about their old relationship. Say, why do you think he went as far to disgrace himself by staying with the Demon Lord instead of returning to his sect? Maybe Yan Wushi gave him a pleasure that no one else could. At this point in the conversation, the two of them snickered in unison, their faces revealing their unspoken thoughts. They had no idea that the person they were gossiping about was sitting at the table beside them, currently listening to their conversation without a twitch in expression. Shen Qiao even had the mood to place 2 pieces of beef on some flatbread to make into a beef roll before placing it into his mouth and chewing slowly. At this point, he's like, "I'm used to it. Whatever. A woman caught me giving soup into his mouth to mouth. At this point, what could hurt?" Since Huan Yu sect and He Huan sect came from the same source, then Huan Yu sect must know He Huan sect's techniques. What you said is completely possible. The Demon Lord was skilled in martial arts, but he must have been even more skilled in bed. After getting a taste, Shen Qiao couldn't stop himself from wanting more. Maybe the Demon Lord was already tired of him, and it was Shen Qiao who was unable to let go. The last word was barely out of his mouth when he suddenly screamed. He slapped his hands over his mouth and keeled over and then writhed on the floor in pain. This sudden episode gave everyone a huge shock. They all turned to gaze at him as one. Naturally, the person who'd hurt him couldn't have been sitting behind him. Shen Qiao was somewhat surprised too. He looked to the front of that person. Ui sat there, his posture and manner severe. He slowly put down the chopstick in his hand and said coldly, "Since when does an outsider have the right to humiliate a member of our Zhandu Mountain?" Oh, look at Ui standing up for Shen Qiao, but also being jealous. All right. Woo! Chapter 58, Expulsion. Okay. Even if some people had been ignorant of Ui's identity beforehand, after what he just said, it was nearly impossible for them not to realize. The reason they judged Shen Qiao without fear was because they thought that, to Zhandu Mountain, he was only a discarded disciple. Having long lost his martial arts and his glory, he posed no threat to them, and Zhandu Mountain protecting him was even more impossible. They'd never thought that Ui would step in. After his brief shock, Shen Qiao slowly put down his roll. He understood what was going on. No matter how much of a failure he was still from Zhandu Mountain. When others criticized him, they were also staining Zhandu Mountain's reputation, and Ui naturally would not stand for that. But if Ui cared that much about Zhandu Mountain's reputation, wasn't collaborating with the Gok Turks and receiving titles from them even more shameful? Shen Qiao inwardly shook his head, clearing such thoughts from his mind. He had no interest in watching the farce in front of him any longer. He was only waiting for them to drink and eat their fill before leaving, and then he could get up and leave himself. The man whose teeth Ui had shattered was in an uncontrollable rage. He said something garbled and then grabbed his longsword behind him and leapt at Ui. But Ui didn't even unsheath his sword. With only the remaining chopstick in hand, he knocked the man to the ground. The man in question was called Ji Jin. Though he carried the moniker of Nine-Tailed Divine Fox, people called him Big Mouth Ji behind his back because he was always running his mouth and offending others. Ji Jin wasn't too shabby of a martial artist, not first-rate, but his skills were enough to be second-rate. Normally, he'd have more restraint and wouldn't talk smack about others right to their face, but who knew what he was thinking this time? Somehow he'd failed to realize the obvious fact that the sect leader of Zhandu Mountain himself was sitting right before him, so in a bout of terrible misfortune, he managed to humiliate himself and his entire family line. His friend didn't dare back him up before Ui, only helped Ji Jin up and smiled apologetically in Ui's direction. "Please forgive him, Sect Leader Yu. This brother of mine has had too much to drink, and he really said some shameful things." Ui didn't reply. His gaze swept right over to the man to fall on the one behind him. "Ah Chow, it's been such a long time, you won't even say a word of greeting?" Shen Qiao sighed to himself. They'd grown up together since childhood and knew each other like the back of their own hands. Even if he covered his face, his mannerisms and figure would still evoke that sense of familiarity. Ui wasn't a fool. He'd eventually realized it was him. Shen Qiao pulled down his hood and someone near him said, "It really is Shen Qiao!" This voice instantly drew in a wave of low, shocked responses. Quite a few of them felt somewhat guilty. The man they'd just been loudly discussing had been right next to them, sitting and listening. What sort of ill fortune was blowing about today? They spoke of Shen Qinggong, and Qinggong came. Now they spoke of Shen Qiao, and Shen Qiao was also here. Would Yan Wushi show up in a moment too? Several of them thought this and couldn't help but shiver, glancing around themselves. "It's been a while. Has Sect Leader Yu been well?" Since he'd already been discovered, Shen Qiao didn't bother pretending anymore. He nodded to Ui, his voice mild, as if they were no more than distant acquaintances, meeting again after many years. For a moment to Ui, the noise and the commotion of the inn seemed to ebb like the tide. Only Shen Qiao's voice remained in his ears. "Ui, you have got it so bad for him. Oh my God." He stared at Shen Qiao, scrutinizing him, as if he were trying to determine whether Shen Qiao really was doing well. It was a long while before he replied, "You've lost weight." Shen Qiao didn't reply to his comment. He was only here to gather information, and now that he'd been discovered, he had no reason to continue staying. "I still have some important matters to attend to, so I'll be leaving first. Please enjoy your meals, Sect Leader Yu and Guild Leader Do." Of course Ui wouldn't let him leave so easily. His foot moved, and then he was in front of Shen Qiao. "Ah Chow, come back to Zhandu Mountain with me." Shen Qiao's expression didn't so much as flicker. "Surely Sect Leader Yu jests. I am no longer a disciple of Zhandu Mountain, so why would I go back there?" Yui was faintly enraged. I never ordered your expulsion. So why? So you still are a disciple of Zhandu Mountain. Are you unwilling to acknowledge even Shizun now? Shen Qiao shook his head. I believe you're mistaken on one thing. I am Chi Fengge's disciple. This point will never change, no matter what, but you colluded with Kunye to poison me. Had me lose to him on Bamboo Peak, then took the chance to steal the position of sect leader, and furthermore, you even began to collaborate with the Gok Turks. Ever since then, Zhandu Mountain is no longer Zhandu Mountain that I know. Even without you ordering my expulsion, I will not acknowledge myself as a disciple of Zhandu Mountain. Shen Qiao had spoken these staggering, unnerving words in a mild and placid tone, which made what he said feel all the more convoluted and jarring. No one had anticipated there was this kind of tale behind Shen Qiao's fall from the cliff back then. Oh, everyone's hearing him say it! They were all stunned into silence, frozen in place. When their wits returned, a roaring clamor immediately erupted in the hall. Yui, too, had not expected from Shen Qiao to choose to spill the details here in public at this moment. His face immediately flushed crimson, not from shame, but from indignation. Of course Shen Qiao had no evidence. Even if he'd said it, it couldn't do anything to Yui. But Yui still felt like his clothes had been stripped off, leaving him naked. He tramped down his rage and said evenly, Ah Chao, come back with me. Yui, the Gok Turks are savage and ambitious, said Shen Qiao coolly. Everyone knows this. Yet for the sake of your own prospects and interests, you willingly went to ask a tiger for its skin. You even forced all of Zhandu Mountain onto your ship. Right now, I can't stop you. But that doesn't mean I approve of this outcome, nor that I'll enter the mire with you. You, since it's come to this point, with so many people here, let us ask them to be our witnesses. As Chi Fengge's mantle disciple, I hereby declare this. From now on, you are no longer Chi Fengge's disciple. We shall walk our own paths, cross our own bridges, and have nothing to do with each other. Shen Qiao stood his place, his expression as indifferent as ever, as if he were completely unaware of the massive waves his words would incite. His Daoist robe fluttered faintly beneath his cloak despite the lack of wind. Of course it does! A powerful presence around him and yet no trace of anger. At this moment, his handsome face, once so gentle and harmless, carried with it a fierceness that made others unable to look at him directly. He was like a sword kept within a box. Even unsheathed, he already radiated a piercing brilliance. Yui was both shocked and outraged. How dare you? Shizun has already passed. How can you speak for his esteemed self like that? I was the only one around when Shizun passed. And I am Shizun's only mantle disciple, Shen Qiao replied. My will is his will. I only quietly endured it before, out of consideration for the greater picture. I didn't want to see Zhandu Mountain divided by internal strife, but you've pushed, and you even accepted titles from the Gok Turks, and you've gone against Shizun's teaching. I must naturally expel you on his behalf. Even Buddha's new wrath. His face had lost all traces of gentleness. It was now replaced by a stormy rage. Yui, listen to me. You have no right to punish me because none of Zhandu Mountain's forefathers will ever acknowledge you as sect leader. I hope you can finish what you've started. If you insist on obstinately clinging to your ways, unwilling to repent, then one day I will return to punish you. The hall was a graveyard of silence. Everyone was staring at Shen Qiao, completely unable to connect with him. The man, the rumors had claimed, had willingly disgraced himself and cozied up with the demon lord. Once Shen Qiao had finished, he walked towards the entrance without another glance back. Yui stopped wavering. He grabbed Junzi Buchi, wanting to stop him, but Shen Qiao was faster. Bystanders only saw a flash of black knocking Yui's sword away. With a closer look, they realized that Shen Qiao hadn't even unsheathed his sword. At this moment, Dao Yanshan, who's been there the whole time, moved. At first, he only wanted to enjoy this family quarrel between sex siblings as a bystander. However, looking at how indecisive Yui's moves were, the hesitation within his heart clear, Dao Yanshan knew they probably wouldn't be able to stop his Shizhong. So in this situation, he had no choice but to lend his hand. I haven't known sect leader Yu for long, but I know he is a sentimental person who cares for his old friendships and is unwilling to be harsh with Daoist Master Shen. I asked Daoist Master Shen to cool down a little. Why don't we all sit down and have a long conversation? But Shen Qiao didn't move, to fight Dao Yanshan. Instead, his gait shifted, and using a rainbow stretches across the heavens, he circled around him and immediately arrived at the exit of the end. "Ah Chao, do not force my hand," Ui snarled. Junzi Buchi was already unsheathed. Before Shen Qiao could respond, a mocking remark came from the side. "Fighting the few with many, achieving victory through superior numbers. Are the two of you planning to do to Taoist Master Shen what you did to Yan Wushi?" Qin Gong, who had been looking on this the entire time, now finally stood. This matter was unrelated to him, but for some reason he'd stuck his hand in. Dao Yanshan laughed. "The Duke of Pengchong County has just obtained the Tai sword. Shouldn't you return quickly and report back to Lord of Qi? Why are you idling about here and meddling in unrelated affairs?" Coming from his mouth, the words Duke of Pengchong County was tinged with subtle taunting. Qinggong might have been a new noble of Qi, but he had nothing to do with the Zhonghu, and so the Liu Guild had no reason to take him seriously. Qinggong didn't reply to Dao Yanshan's words. Instead, he looked at Shen Qiao and said warmly, "If Taoist Master Shen finds it difficult to extricate himself, I've rented an entire relay station within the capital. You can follow me there for some rest." "I'm deeply grateful for the Duke of Pengchong County's kindness," said Shen Qiao, "but this lowly Taoist must decline your hospitality." Saying this, he cupped his hands at him and then turned to leave. Ui naturally couldn't let him leave so easily. "Wait," he said, reaching out towards Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao didn't even glance back. Like eyes had sprouted on the back of his head, he slid a couple steps forward, as light as a feather, and then turned around with his sword across his chest, blocking Ui's outstretched hand. He channeled true Qi into the sheath. Ui felt a slight jolt and was forced to release it. But Ui reacted quickly. With his other hand, he drew Junzi Buchi, and his sword glare poured forth, airy and graceful. It swept toward Shen Qiao's face, even Dao Yanshan was a little shocked to see it. He thought to himself that Ui probably hadn't used his full strength during the ambush on Yan Wushi, and that he only appeared seriously injured, when in truth, he just hadn't wanted to lead the charge. Regardless of which it was, Ui was determined to keep Shen Qiao there. This time, now that there was no Yan Wushi to thwart him, he absolutely refused to allow him to escape before his very eyes again. He knew that Joyful Reunion's poison was matchlessly potent. With how sickly and feeble Shen Qiao had been on Jiandu Mountain, a full recovery in such a short period of time was impossible. But he hadn't realized that with a long separation, a reappraisal was due. Ui's sword glare flowed through a myriad of shapes and descended upon Shen Qiao, but the man who should be enveloped by the sword screen vanished. He reappeared behind Ui, his footwork indescribably swift and uncanny, but his sword remained sheathed as before. Instead, he stretched out his right hand and tapped a finger upon the sword screen. True Qi poured onto the screen, and immediately it shattered, reduced to a fine powder and scattering in all directions. A trace of disbelief surfaced on Ui's face. The tip of his sword quivered, and he twirled it a couple dozen times. It wove toward Shen Qiao, rippling with light. It made for a resplendent and otherworldly scene, as the jeweled rays piercing the heavens like light spilling over colored glaze. Dazzling, splendid, and radiant. These were the last set of moves from the Azure Wave sword technique, but somewhat changed. None of Qi Fengge's disciples were incompetent naturally, and Ui had made several alterations to them for himself. Most days, his disposition was frosty, and he rarely smiled, but he loved using this kind of gorgeous, brilliant swordplay. Even his sword Qi carried with it a thunderous, seething viciousness. As it hurtled forth with the sword glares, a great rumble roared in the ears of everyone present. Even those somewhat lacking in martial arts could already feel their blood and Qi roiling, and they couldn't help but back up a few steps. But Shen Qiao didn't retreat. He actually didn't retreat. This went completely against everyone's expectations, including those who'd once looked down on him, taking him for Yan Wushi's kept man and subordinate. Shen Qiao finally unsheathed his sword. Shanghai Tongbei flashed forth like silk, its sword Qi soaring to the heavens. It spread forth from Shen Qiao, rich and mellow, until one couldn't help but want to drown themselves in its comfortable warmth. But many people were still distracted from earlier and failed to notice that Shen Qiao's sword had already been thrusting before him. It took no time at all. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Both parties were already in the air, their sword tips pointed at each other. Ui moved as swiftly as lightning, but Shen Qiao was even faster. He became one with his sword and then suddenly vanished from Yuai's line of sight. In the world of martial arts, speed is everything. At once, Yuai's guard rose. He immediately turned and swung his sword behind him, but it was already too late. Shen Qiao's sword intent was only inches away, and there was no escape. He only had the time to see that glimpse of a white sword glare, and his heart sank. Lacking the time for careful thought, he retreated upon his with unprecedented swiftness, pushing his rainbow stretches across the heavens to the utmost. His entire person disappeared into thin air and then reappeared 3 feet away. Shen Qiao could have pursued and caught him. His white sword intent and had already been perfected. The next step up would be to achieve sword heart. Even if he only had half of his internal energy, his white sword intent was more than enough to terrify many out of their senses. But Shen Qiao didn't press his advantages, and Yuai came to a stop as well. The two of them stared at each other, each lost in their own emotions. They both knew that they could never return to the past. Shen Qiao stood there, back as straight as a pine, his sword pointed towards the ground. He said sternly, "You should understand now that if we fight, neither your victory nor my defeat are guaranteed. Stop thinking that if you have me at your mercy, you can manipulate me as you please. Even if I'm no longer the sect leader of Jiangdu Mountain, I am still Shen Qiao, still Qi Fengge's disciple." There was a complicated expression on Yuai's face. "Yan Ying and Hingbo miss you very much. They wish for your return." "Yuai, after you poisoned me with joyful reunion, I no longer believe anything you say." Yuai's expression darkened. Something billowed within his eyes, as if raging waves were soon to come. "I was wrong then. But starting from now, I'll never hurt you again." Shen Qiao shook his head. "What's the point of saying this now? What's done cannot be undone. That which is broken cannot be repaired, and no reparations can make up for the wrongs inflicted. What people call reparations is only a way to deceive themselves and others. The reason I won't return to Jiangdu Mountain is because I don't want a Jiangdu Mountain rent by strife, and even more, because I don't want the efforts of our forefathers to vanish like smoke. Since you've already taken that step together with the disciples of Jiangdu Mountain, you must brace yourselves for the consequences. When the day comes that you can no longer bear them, I will come find you myself." Yuai's chest heaved erratically. After a long moment, he gave a frosty laugh and said, "Very well, very well." As he repeated those words, his icy tone was tinged with a hint of despair. But it quickly faded, as if it were a mere illusion. He slid his sword back into his sheath without another word and turned and left. Not once did he glance back at Shen Qiao. Dao Yanshan rubbed his nose. Now that Yuai was gone, he lost his excuse to intervene. Even more, he was still wary and fearful of Shen Qiao's martial arts, so naturally he wasn't too eager to throw himself back into the muck. "Congratulations on recovering your martial arts, Daoist Master Shen," he said. "As someone who is friendly with sect leader Yu, I was obligated to speak up for him earlier. I ask that you take no offense." The reason Dao Yanshan was able to lead the largest guild in all the land was he was incredibly cunning. He wasn't easy to deal with. Just before he'd attacked without hesitation, and now he'd apologized right away, quick and decisive, a shrewd and formidable man to the end. It was hard to strike a smiling face, and for someone of Shen Qiao's upbringing, it was even more impossible. He nodded and said, "We all have our own positions. This I understand. Guild leader Dao is too generous." Dao Yanshan said, "Previously, Daoist Master Shen took Yan Wushi's body away with him. I trust that the man has already been interred. It's unfortunate that a grandmaster of his generation had to lose his life outside the Great Wall. The dead must be revered above all else, and to the people of the Central Plains, a burial at home is highly important. If Daoist Master Shen does not object, the Liue Guild is willing to lend our help. We can transport sect leader Yan's corpse back to Chang'an and deliver it to the Huan Yu sect." Shen Qiao responded coolly, "I'm grateful to Guild Leader Dao for all his kindness. However, the body was already interred. Unearthing it again would be inauspicious. The people of the Jiangyu place less importance in those customs, and since he had countless enemies, he should have already anticipated this kind of end. I only retrieved his remains due to the small bit of friendship that we shared in the past." Dao Yanshan tried to probe further, but Shen Qiao's defenses were watertight. There wasn't even the slightest hint of a leak. Shen Qiao looked at the people around him and said slowly, "Your mouths are yours alone. You can speak about me as you wish. I won't interfere. If you're dissatisfied with me, you only need to come and find me. I'll be humbly waiting. But if I hear anyone insult Jean du Mountain or my master, then please excuse my sword for its lack of mercy." Right before these words fell, a white light flashed in everyone's eyes. Before they could react, the bamboo banner pole in front of the inn's door fell to the ground in 6 neat pieces. Even the banner at the top had been reduced to a fine powder by the sword glare. Everyone gaped, completely astounded. The ones who denigrated and slandered him to his back earlier felt their hearts tremble. They knew very well that just this sword glare itself was far beyond what most of them could ever achieve in their lives, and it was obvious Shen Qiao meant this as a warning and a threat. It wasn't only for them, it was also for Dao Yanshan. But Dao Yanshan was all smiles. He seemed perfectly at ease and even clapped his hands. "Oh, Daoist Master Shen must have perfected his swordplay already," he exclaimed. "It's but a small trick. Nothing worth showing off," said Shen Qiao. "I've embarrassed myself before Guild Leader Dao." If this had been in the past, with his disposition, Shen Qiao would never make a display of his martial arts like this, but things had changed. Some people would never listen to reason, and only understood if you spoke with your fist. They fully believed that the strong were king. To them, kindness was no more than a weakness. After wandering the Jianghu for a year, Shen Qiao had finally learned to deal with different people using different means. He paid the waiter for the damaged banner together with his meal, and then he turned to leave. Of course, this time, no one stopped him. Since Dao Yanshan and Ui were here, Shen Qiao couldn't leave the city rashly, let alone look for a pharmacy to purchase medicine. Otherwise, the other party's astuteness would immediately let them realize that something was amiss. So he found another inn and pretended to settle down there. Once night fell and curfew arrived, he silently left the city at last and ran towards the village. The move he'd showed the crowd earlier was no more than an empty display of strength. He knew better than anyone else that with his current fighting abilities, fighting Ui was already pushing it. Ui hadn't suspected anything due to his own guilty conscience and the psychological blow he'd taken from Shen Qiao's words, but Dao Yanshan was different. As a bystander, he could see clearly, and he likely still had some doubts about Shen Qiao's martial arts. Right now, there was a millstone with the surname Yan waiting for him in the village, so Shen Qiao couldn't absolutely afford any mistakes. The moon was already high in the sky when he arrived at the village. Oh, and its gentle glow spilling over the river. Shen Qiao finally slowed his steps and walked towards Bana's house. The village at night was cloaked in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional baying of dogs in the distance. Shen Qiao gave the courtyard gate a few light taps. They sounded clearly in the dead of night, easily loud enough for the people inside to hear. A candle flame still burned within the building, evidence the residents had yet to sleep. After a moment he heard the patter of footsteps, and the courtyard gate opened. Bana's frightened face appeared by the entrance. Shen Qiao's eyes didn't work very well at this time of day, but he was accustomed to being blind. He'd long been able to tell someone's emotions by their breathing, footsteps, and tone, and his heart sank a little, straight away. Did something happen? "Oh, Xinglong-jun, you finally returned," Bana held her chest. "Grandpa isn't home and I was scared of being here by myself. That living dead man is awake!" "Oh, you bitch! Oh, you bitch! Oh, you bitch! Oh my god, no! Oh, the cliffhangers have arrived! The cliffhangers have arrived! Oh no! You son of a bitches, they're here! It's not fair! So, oh man! Hi! Hi, Volume 3! How you doing? Oh, we're off to an amazing start. We're off to an amazing start. We're barely into this, and oh, buddy. Oh, I figured when I sat down to read this set of chapters, I was like, okay, Shen Qiao is going to take Yan Wushi. What is he going to do with him? I don't know, but he's going to be trying to, like, heal him, nurse him back to health, do something. The soup? The soup? I was not expecting the soup. I was not expecting Bana and like her whole deal. I was not expecting Qing Gong to be seen again. I was not expecting Dao Yongshan and UI to show up at the end. I was not expecting a fight between Shen Qiao and UI and basically Shen Qiao saying screw you, and I was not expecting any of this at all. But that's what we got. Oh my god. This is why I have been so excited to jump into these chapters in volume 3 now that we're past the donghua, because I'm like, I have no clue what's coming. I have no clue what's going to happen next. I'm so excited. I had to slow myself down to read out loud slower because I just wanted to like gobble it up and keep going, and I was getting faster, and I'm like, Romania, if you do not slow down, no one is going to understand what you're saying. So I was like, this was wonderful. This is everything I wanted. I am like ready to go full steam ahead with this novel. You all have no idea. It is going to be very hard for me to, I mean, obviously I have other series on my channel, as you know. These just come out every Monday. There's 6 other days in the week that there are other series on the channel coming out. So, I mean, I'd like to say I'm going to record ahead. I don't know if I will always be able to, but I will be immediately wanting to know. I may have to, like, I'm gonna try to wait for comments. I'm gonna try to wait for comments so badly, but like, I'm going to try to wait for comments, but the wanting to read what happens next and the next chapter set, because the next chapter set we're going to be looking at next week is 59 through 61, and it is going to be the last audio drama episode before season 1 of the audio drama ends, which is episode 15. It's going to be hard. This audio drama, by the way, episode 14, by the way, it was huge. It was like, I'm recording this at like 10 o'clock at night because I was like, well, usually the audio drama episodes are like 25 minutes. They have the intro song, they have the outro song. This one was 40 minutes long. They got like the first 10 minutes of the audio drama episode. The first 10 minutes was literally just the battle with Yan Wushi, which was really well done. The sound in the audio drama of Do Yanshan clunking and splitting Yan Wushi's skull, the sound that made, ew. In the audio drama, they say he spit blood onto the abbot instead of just spitting on him, which is, well. But yeah, so the main difference that we get, we'll talk about a couple differences from the audio drama and the novel. The main difference is that when Shen Qiao gets Yan Wushi, like scoops him up, he notes that there's a sandstorm coming, and that's why they have to go find a village. A lot of the things that are exposition end up being said in the audio drama because it needs to happen. So I'm going to walk through this with you all. This was an amazing chapter set. I was like, holy shit. Chapter 56 was fairly short, and then chapter 58 was just... But yeah, so Shen Qiao is just like, what do I do? Yan Wushi has some life left in him. He has that little wisp that we don't know if it's like if it's the technique they were talking about, if it's from the Zhuyong strategies, like what Shen Qiao was having, if it's, you know, part of his, you know, true chi that's still resonating in Yan Wushi. We're not sure what the cause is, but somehow or another, despite the fact that the man looks like a living corpse, he is still alive, but he's barely hanging on. So, in a way that we are paralleling, and we're doing a full come circle moment from volume 1, just as the funny thing is, what's so hilarious, and I didn't bring Whiteboard Kun out for this chapter set because a lot of it is action and just shock value that we need to talk about. But the funny thing is, when you compare Shen Qiao taking Yan Wushi back after his fall, after he was, you know, the assassination attempt upon him, versus when Yan Wushi took back Shen Qiao after the assassination attempt upon him, they could not be more different. Shen Qiao fell down off the cliff, was lying there, and Yan Wushi's like, you pick him up and let's go. Just like, he had you, Shen Yan, pick him up and carry him back to his place, and then Yan Wushi was like, I mean, I don't care if he lives or dies, but he'll be fine. Like, just put a Band-Aid on it, put a Band-Aid on it, put a wet wash rag on it, he'll be great. And if he's not, then, not my problem. Like, that was literally him. And then you have Shen Qiao, who carries him on his back, which I'm pretty sure the donghua when they had Shen Qiao carrying Yan Wushi back from the cave. I'm pretty sure that was just a nod to the novel since they weren't getting to it. But he not only carries him back, he basically feeds him like a bird and cares about him to a ridiculous degree because he's just that nice of a person. And we're going to talk about that. And just, they could not be different scenarios. It could not be more different scenarios. It just could not be. But here's the thing. Here is the thing. Let us be very real about this. We're gonna be talking about UI. We're gonna be talking a lot about UI when we get to him. But Shen Qiao is like, oh, I'm only saving Yan Wushi because of the sense of justice that I have. And I'm only saving him because, I'm only saving him because I feel like he's the best hope that we have for the people and all of this. But as this chapter set went on, I was thinking to myself, I think Shen Qiao still believes that. I don't think Shen Qiao is lying to himself. I think he genuinely still believes everything he said earlier. What I don't think Shen Qiao has realized is that he very much likes Yan Wushi. He has a thing for him and does not want to acknowledge it because he's trying to be like, no, I'm a daoist. I can't get married. I'm not gay. I'm not into guys. I'm not into him. It's fine. Let's not talk about it. Like, he doesn't want to bring it up, but it becomes very apparent that, yes, you like this man. You don't want him to die. You're going through all of these very extreme circumstances to keep him alive when anybody else would have given up by now. And part of it could be, you could say it's stubbornness. Part of it is Shen Qiao's sense of justice being stubborn and making him go to these lengths. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, sure, Jan. I'm like, you do like him. Which is funny because it's kind of like Yan Wushi. Yan Wushi is like feelings, emotions. I'm not affected by them. I don't like Shen Qiao. And then he gets caught up in the feelings and he's like, shh, and then like sends him over to Song Jijing. He's like, nope, can't do it. And it's kind of the same thing. It's just to a more subtle degree with Shen Qiao. But these two guys like each other. It's very obvious. From an outsider perspective, we're like, get a room. And they're like, but why? They don't realize it yet. They don't realize it. But Shen Qiao is not going to take a challenge undaunted. He is going to try and make sure that he can try to save his life. So they end up staying in this like town outside by the Gobi Desert, the royal capital of Tuyunhun. He's like, we can't go there, so we're gonna go to one of the villages that are near it. I really appreciate the cultural differences that we're getting to see. Like the girl, like Bana and her grandfather, the grandfather knows Mandarin, but Bana doesn't really know it very well. So there's like some cultural differences there, and the way that they dress is different, and the way that Shen Qiao was talking about how brazen she is about admitting her love confession and saying things very forthright. It kind of reminded me of the U.S. a little bit, like, because people in the U.S. just say things where, like, the decorum is not the same. So when he was talking about that, I was like, no, that sounds about right. I understand that. I would be like Bana. Also, can we talk about, if you've listened to the audio drama, you can sound off as well. I'm sure you will agree. Bana sounds so young. Like in the novel, when she first walked up, I thought she was like 17 or 18. No, she's 14. And in the audio drama, she sounds 14. She sounds like a little kid. And I was like, we gotta make it very clear that when she like confesses Shen Qiao's like, I'm almost 30, girl. Nah. Which, talking about the age gaps, I've talked about age gaps a lot with Yaoi and other BL that I've read. And here's my viewpoint of it. You need to finish cooking mentally and in maturity wise before you're ready for the age gap relationship. So until you're like in your mid 20s, no, if you're a minor, if you are under 18, you are not ready for an age gap relationship. Absolutely not. No, you still need to cook. You got some more time in the oven to get those processing speeds up and that maturity up and that experience up in the world before you can make those decisions. But once you're like 25 and let's say they're 35, it's like, it's fine. You're a full grown person who can make logical adult decisions by that point. It's not so bad. I know people in their 30s who've married people in their late 20s. Totally acceptable. And so Yan Wushi being like in his 40s and Shen Qiao being in his 30s, that's totally fine. I think that is an appropriate age gap. I'm in my 30s And I find people in their 40s attractive. That's fine. That's totally great. But Bana, no, girl, you too young. You too young indeed. In the audio drama, there's a moment where Shen Qiao is like putting Yan Wushi down. You can like feel, you can hear him like putting him down. He's like, he says, are his brains gonna come out? And I was like, oh my God, the way they described the crack in his skull, which I am a little concerned, the way that the audio drama ends and the way that this chapter set ends. The chapter set ends with Bana saying that Yan Wushi woke up. In the audio drama, it ended with Bana getting grabbed by Yan Wushi as she like notices he's waking up. So I'm assuming it's before Shen Qiao shows up. So she must have got away. But maybe she was like, oh my God, he's like woke up and I don't know what to do. So I am a little concerned that Yan Wushi is going to be a bit discombobulated and a little bit like, by the time, because in the audio drama, he's like, who are you? Like he wakes up being like, why is there a woman here? I don't like women. So I am concerned by what we're going to get next chapter set with Yan Wushi waking up potentially and being rightfully pissed. So we'll see where that goes. But, you know, it'd be funny if Shen Qiao I don't want him to take on like a Kathy Bates in Misery kind of situation, but if Shen Qiao is like, takes on like the nurse that's like, you're going to sit down and shut up while I help you heal, sir. Like if he was very stern, because Shen Qiao was stern as hell in this chapter set. He was letting UI have it. And I was like, oh, he finally just got fed up. Shen Qiao just finally got fed up. He said, F it, and then just let everybody have it. Because he's like, I've been stuck for days, taking care of this man, feeding him soup like a bird, and nothing's getting better, and I don't know what to do, and I'm just over it. Like, Shen Qiao just, like, he hit the final straw, and he was just like, that's it. And it was so good to witness. I was like, oh my gosh. It was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. But anyway, so Shen Qiao, you know, finds a way to talk this girl and her grandfather into letting them stay in this village, in this little hut that just conveniently has several rooms. He's like, yes, score. And so he's like, I've got to try and get Yan Wushi back to life, essentially. So chapter 56 ends with him saying that the true chi in Yan Wushi seemed to grow little by little, that the Zhuyang strategy, what the volume that he had consumed was working, but that this was not like Shen Qiao. I like that they established, like, this is not a direct parallel of what happened to Shen Qiao. He's like, the difference is Yan Wushi didn't lose his martial arts, so he couldn't do like Shen Qiao and destroy everything and rebuild from scratch. You can't rebuild it. It's not at that level. And he's like, and his fatal injuries weren't the result of ruined foundations. You know, it's one thing to rebuild your foundations. It's one thing to repair a giant skull that's been cracked open, you know. He's like, if Yan Wushi remained the way he was, he wouldn't be able to escape death. And Shen Qiao's like, I don't know what else to do, but I need to figure out where we're going to go to from here. And then we get chapter 57, which it was called Royal Capital, and we didn't get to the Royal Capital for a while. And so I was a little bit like, when are we going to get to the Royal Capital? When's it going to be important? But it ends up being massively important as we get there. So first of all, Shen Qiao going above and beyond. He's like, he uses his true chi to dissolve the blood clots within his brain and slowly reorient his meridians and repair his organs. So Shen Qiao, over the course of several days, has been pouring his own energy into Yan Wushi. Now, if this were Heaven Official's blessing or an MXTX work, for example, then the way in which that true chi would be oriented into their body would be very romantic and possibly sexual. But our dear auteur, Meng Shiji, is not the romantic person like that. Instead, she's like, no, we're not taking the easy way out. We're going to have him be doing some hard work here. And what I love is that she takes situations that would be romantic and smutty in other stories, and she just makes it really realistic and kind of awkward for Shen Qiao, where he's like trying to give him the soup and he's like, I don't have medical tools. This is all I know how to do. It's awkward, but I'm doing it. And he's like, no one's going to know. And I love it because the author is like, in any other novel, it'd be like played up as a sexy thing. And here, the only thing that happens is that Bana thinks that they're having this weird, intimate, kinky moment. And Shen Qiao's like, I wish, but we're not. So that's amazing. And just, you can tell that Shen Qiao is trying to figure out a way to save him. He's like, I've come this far. I've done all of this. What am I going to do? And I love that the idea of him just smiling bitterly. He's like, I just want to get him well enough to where I can take him back to beyond Yanmei and just be like, here's your master. I saved him. Peace up. Deuces. Bye. And then he can go. Because I appreciate that Shen Qiao, him trying to save Yan Wushi, he likes him. That's apparent. But it's not, because out of an obligation to him. He still is, kind of trying to figure out why he betrayed him and what all that was about. But he's like, I just need to save him. He's like, the good daoist in me cannot just walk away. And I like a challenge. So, what can we do? And I love how he describes Yan Wushi, who was this once like diva, egotistical man, just lying there devoid of all that personality. And you can tell Shen Qiao is kind of sad about that. He's like, Yan Wushi is Yan Wushi because of his personality and who he is. And the fact that he doesn't have any of that to him, he's like, kind of sucks. So, okay, during this part of chapter 57, it's around page 42, where Shen Qiao is trying to, not around page 42, let me find it here. It's around page 47, where he's talking about how Yan Wushi used to be, as he's like trying to like put his true chi in him to repair his organs and everything. In the audio drama, so here's the thing, in the audio drama, there is a whole scene that happens that is not in the novel, and it's a little bit sensual, but basically, like, it starts out as Shen Qiao is transferring his true chi to Yan Wushi. He's berated by all of these moments of Yan Wushi in a sensual, sexy voice being like, ah, chow, ah, chow. And, like, all the times he's saying it, it's almost like he's moaning, to be fair. And it ends, Shen Qiao's getting, like, frustrated. You can hear him getting frustrated by all of this. And it ends with with Yan Wushi telling Shen Qiao he hopes he finds happiness. And so in this moment, Shen Qiao has this kind of mental dialogue with Yan Wushi's inner self. Whether or not it's really Yan Wushi or just Shen Qiao's imagination of him, we aren't told as the audience. It's just happening while he's pouring chi into his body. He mentally asks why Yan Wushi did what he did with Song Jijing, and he's like, how could you benefit from disgracing me? And Yan Wushi replies with, well, of course I benefit. Can you guess how? And he teases him like that, and Shen Qiao says he doesn't want to imagine how. So Shen Qiao, while he's pouring all this chi into Yan Wushi, is trying to figure out why he betrayed him. And Yan Wushi's like, well, I kind of already have given you the answer. And Shen Qiao's like, I don't want to think about it that way. And then Yan Wushi says, he's like, well, I am who I am. I'm not going to be influenced by anyone, not even you, Shen Qiao. And Shen Qiao is like, well, I didn't mean to influence you. And then he kind of realizes what we talked about last week, where he's like, shit, Yan Wushi has always been the same person. I've been trying to change him. I shouldn't have done that. And so then, he has the dialogue in the audio drama where Shen Qiao tells him, he's like, you did this to yourself. You did this because you were arrogant. And in the little like scene where Yan Wushi is replying to him internally, he's like, I know I was arrogant, but that's who I am. And it ends with, but I still have you, don't I, Ah Chow? And I was like, oh! And that scene ends in the audio drama with Shen Qiao being like, was this the Moyin Shijin or was it a hallucination? Was this the strategy of saving him? Was it the Zhuyong strategies? Was I just hallucinating about this? Did he really say that? Because that would imply that Yan Wushi is going to be dependent upon Shen Qiao and wants to have Shen Qiao around him. And Shen Qiao's like, maybe I'm just imagining that. Maybe that's not real. So it's set, I feel like the audio drama is even trying to ship Yan Wushi and Shen Qiao. And I'm like, the novel is not. The novel is very much saying like Shen Qiao said that Yan Wushi was a friend in the inn, And he said he was a friend to Bana to let them stay, but he's not fully committed to that because he's still kind of bitter about what Yan Wushi did to him, which he should be. That Song Jijing is a terrible person. He should be bitter about it, but he's conflicted because he has these feelings for Yan Wushi and he's trying to work through them. So yeah. So anyway, so he points out, he's like, a feeling of absurdity surged through him that day when Yan Wushi had personally delivered him to Song Jijing and forced him upon the edge of a precipice. He never thought he'd end up where he was today, and not that he'd end up completely at someone else's mercy. If Shen Qiao hadn't shown up, then Yan Wushi would have long been decapitated. And so there's this moment where Shen Qiao, you know, he does think, he's like, all he has to do is just do this one strike and he could kill Yan Wushi here and now. He could take revenge, but that's not Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao doesn't play dirty, and he doesn't get revenge upon people like that, and he doesn't do these underhanded things. Instead, he sees a man who could be the savior of his people or lead this people to be saved, and he's like, I'm just gonna feed you this soup. Which, you know, Shen Qiao just being a damn saint over here. It's so fascinating, especially with how Shen Qiao treats UI later on in the chapter set. It's so fascinating. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to get there. But yeah. So yeah, this scene, oh my God. To be fair, Yan Wushi is a very handsome man. He looks great. And I want to get to that part here where we have all this. I'm going to stop here, chapter 59. That's as far as we've gotten. We are still barely into volume 3. That is crazy to me. But yeah, so the scene in the book that they give us with him in the soup. God, I love it. And it's just Shen Qiao being a nice person. It's like, he's just trying to help out the best way that he can. So yeah, and then Bana, you know, tries to confess her love, and Shen Qiao's like, I'm too old for you. Sorry about that. She's been dejected. And then she's like, I hope his esteemed self, this Buddha, blesses the two of you so you can grow old together. Girl has, without realizing it, tied these two men to fate. Mm-hmm. Without realizing it, this woman has made them fated to be together. They're going to spend 1,000 autumns together, all of eternity, apparently. We'll see. But honestly, whenever she was asking how many enemies Yan Wushi had, and Shen Qiao's like, oh, he's got a lot. Shen Qiao is doing a pretty good job of making enemies himself, especially from UI and Dao Yanshan. And I'm sure the abbot's going to get involved in the Gok Turks and everyone else. Like, Shen Qiao's making a lot. Shen Qiao is making this a us against the world type of scenario that's about to happen. And I'm kind of here for it. So yeah. So Shen Qiao finally at the end of chapter 57 goes to the capital, and everyone starts out by talking about the Tai sword, which has been purchased by Chen Gong. Purchased for quite a lot of money, 20,000 gold. That's insane. That's excessive. That's a lot. But it's so wild with listening to him in the audio drama and then seeing how they write about him in the novel. Chen Gong has changed so much in such a short amount of time. And I feel as if the author is kind of indifferent about Chen Gong at the moment. Chen Gong, you know, had these like peasant beginnings where he was struggling to find like a donkey sandwich. And now he's spending 20,000 gold on a random sword that he does not probably know how to use. And so it's such a stark contrast from where he started and how he got here. And I'm surprised that him and Shen Qiao didn't have more dialogue together, but they're probably saving it for later. I'm surprised they didn't speak like more of what was going on, but I feel like that's going to come. It's just not here yet. But yeah, Chen Gong is so interesting to me because he even has this moment where he's nice to Shen Qiao and he's like, hey, I got a place you could stay if you need to. I feel like it's going to come back to that. I think Shen Qiao might take him up on that offer later on, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, Chen Gong shows up and is so arrogant and just wants this whole part of the restaurant to himself and he watches everything go down with Shen Qiao and UI and all that. It's wild. Like, this was just like one person after another coming in. I was like, oh my God. It's just so crazy that the 20,000 gold, I'm still not over it, because we literally watched parents try to eat their children and kids die from malnutrition and the world is starving. And Shenggong, remember your roots, like where you came from. And he is not doing that. And I keep wondering like what his kind of comeuppance is going to be. So, or what his interactions with Shen Qiao are going to be. So I guess we'll see that. I guess we will see that when we get to it. But I wanted more with him and Shen Qiao. But then UI and Do Yanshan show up and they just take over the entire scene. Which, okay. Do Yanshan, what a bro. What a frat bro. Like, he just being like, oh, hey, Shen Qiao, oh my God, your martial arts came back. I just, if you ever need any help, I'll be here. Like, what? And the crazy thing is, all this tying back together, you have Qin Gong, who at the beginning of this story, when him and Shen Qiao were like staying at Chuyun Temple, Qin Gong was like, oh my gosh, we should join the Liyue Guild. We should be with them. We need to like go and be in their troop because they'll give us security. My, how the tables have turned. My, how the tables have turned. Now Qin Gong is out to the side being like, I don't need him. Like, that's crazy, right? And Yan Wushi being comatose in a bed while Shen Qiao is fighting UI. How the tables have turned, indeed. I still like that the story reminds us that Shen Qiao basically has like, he's nearsighted. Like, his vision's okay. It's gotten better, but it's not perfect yet. It's not back to normal. And the story occasionally reminds us of that. But he's gotten used to being blind for so long that he can hear sounds really well and his perception's really good. So even if he can't see perfect, he's doing all right for himself at this point. So yeah, while UI and Dao Yanshan are sitting there, and Shenggong is sitting there, everybody's talking about whether or not Yan Wushi is dead. And then they're questioning. I thought this part was interesting, and I really liked this take that the novel is turn. Like, the novel is taking a turn. And the fact that, instead of everybody being ding dong, the witch is dead with Yan Wushi, like a lot of the Jianghu martial artists are, because Yan Wushi was a threat, the common people kind of like see what we, the audience, see, and they're like, oh, it took 5 of you to take that guy on? That's kind of underhanded. That's kind of bad. It's kind of in poor taste. Like, that's literally what they're saying. They're like, Yan Wushi, man, sucks to be him. He nearly beat 5 guys and then got killed by him. Damn. So it makes Yan Wushi look better in the end, because since he was defeated by 5 men, it's like, wow, it took 5 of you to take him down. That's impressive, like, on his part. But also, man, how underhanded of the 5 of you to take him down together. Like, where's your honor? Like, it just makes him look better. And so it's crazy. Like, if Yan Wushi shows back up, he might garner more sympathy from the people. And if your goal is to persuade everyone to go with a certain person, then Yan Wushi's opinion would have more value because of what's happened to him. So it's kind of crazy. It's weird how that's all working out, right? It's crazy to read in this book, especially considering where we came from earlier on in volumes like 1 and 2. But yeah, then UI, they're like, what is Shen Qiao gonna do? It's a pity that he died in such a way. I wonder how Shen Qiao's gonna recover from this. And UI is just getting very frustrated because he doesn't want to hear people talking about Shen Qiao with Yan Wushi anymore. Yan Wushi is dead. So Shen Qiao is naturally going to come back with him and everything's going to be kumbaya and all hunky-dory. And meanwhile, Dao Yanshan is just like, shut up. And like knocks that guy's teeth out by flicking a finger. What a frat bro. What a bro. So anyway, they're like, do you think that Shen Qiao is in trouble? They're like, didn't he lose all his martial arts? Isn't he a cripple? Surely he doesn't have the face to return to Zhandu Mountain and beg them to take him back. And they're like, he probably doesn't have the guts to go back. And they're like, but why would he go as far to disgrace himself by... They're like, they never expelled him officially, so why would Shen Qiao be with a demon lord? And they're like, well, maybe he was pleasuring him. And at that point, At that point, Shen Qiao was like, I'm used to it. I'm not bothered by it. Whatever. Like, Shen Qiao's packing up like a beef roll. He's like, I don't care. You guys can say whatever you want. I know it's not true. Whatever. You can say I'm Yan Wushi's like sexual partner. I don't care. But the moment that I love that the moment that UI gets involved, that's when Shen Qiao's like, okay. He's like, no. Because they're like, after getting a taste, Shen Qiao couldn't stop himself from wanting more. So they assume that because Shen Qiao has been sexually cultivating with Yan Wushi. And then UI attacks him and Shen Qiao is like, okay, well, he's like, I can handle it. But this is the part that got Shen Qiao. I think if UI had just attacked those guys and told him to shut up, Shen Qiao would have been like, UI, you shouldn't get involved. But it was this moment saying, what does an outsider have the right to do in humiliating a member of our Zhandu Mountain? Because here's the thing. As we start chapter 58, here's the thing. UI knew that Shen Qiao was there. UI is intriguing as a character, and I know some people really like him, and some people don't like him at all. I'm not a fan of UI, but what I find fascinating about him is that I do think he cares for Shen Qiao. I do think he loves Shen Qiao. I think that he is delusional. I think he's delusional in thinking that he could do those things to Shen Qiao and expect him to want to come back to Zhandu Mountain with him and think that in any way Shen Qiao will ever trust him again. I think that he's delusional as all get out, but I do think he cares for Shen Qiao and loves him. He's just delusional beyond all shades of a doubt. And I think this is what got Shen Qiao. I think the moment that UI, knowing Shen Qiao is there, says that Shen Qiao is a member of Zhandu Mountain, Shen Qiao was like, wait a minute. I don't think I recall staying with this sect after everything you've done to me, so I really don't want you putting words in my mouth that aren't yours to make. And that leads us to chapter 58, which is expulsion, which I was not ready for this chapter. I was not ready for Shen Qiao just being a badass and just saying, I've had enough. So yeah, it's like, the reason they judged Shen Qiao without fear was because they thought, he'd lost all of his martial arts and glory. He was no threat. But the moment UI steps in, Shen Qiao, puts down the roll. He knows what's going on. He's like, basically, UI will not stand for Zhandu Mountain being criticized. And he views any slander towards Shen Qiao to be a slander towards Zhandu Mountain. So he's like, I don't want to be involved in this. He's like, I just want to leave. And then UI could have just let him go. But nope. He decided to poke the bear. And that was not a good thing to do. Because Shen Qiao has been running off of little sleep, taking care of Yan Wushi. He's like, I just want to try to get information, and you are throwing all this stuff out, and I'm not here for it. Yep. So, everyone at this point realizes that Shen Qiao is there. In the end, UI has made it known. UI asked for this in a lot of ways. He's like, he could have let Shen Qiao go. He could have met Shen Qiao behind the corner of the alleyway or whatever. He brought it up, and Shen Qiao's like, okay, you poked the bear, now let's go. And so he's like, it's been a while. How have you been? He's like, I don't even want to talk. Let's just get this over with. And of course, I think that Shen Qiao, what makes him madder is the fact that UI is trying to put on these airs. Like, he's like, oh, well, you've lost weight. And, oh, well, your other sect members miss you. And Shen Qiao's like, I can't believe anything you say because you're not genuine. He's like, and you've lied to me and you tried to kill me. And now you want me to come back to Zhandu Mountain to help you save face. And because you have this weird attraction to me, but you've done all these other things. He's like, no. I feel like the difference, because I could see someone saying, well, is Shen Qiao being a hypocrite because he's helping UI to right he's helping Yan Wushi and essentially trying to right the wrongs with him and save his life, but then he treats UI the way that he does. But the big difference is Yan Wushi has always been the same. Yan Wushi's like, I don't like you. I don't like anybody. And I'm going to treat everybody the same, no matter what. And this is just who I am. Get over it. Whereas UI has been kind of a snake in the grass. And he's kind of been two-faced. And on the one hand, he treats Shen Qiao like this, but behind his back, he poisons him and kicks him to the curb and does all the stuff with the Gok Turks. And Shen Qiao is like, at least Yan Wushi has integrity. He's an asshole, but he has an asshole with integrity, and he is who he is, and he doesn't try to be fake. You're being fake. And he's like, and I can't trust anything you say because I don't know what to believe anymore. And so I think that's why Shen Qiao acts the way that he does with UI, because he's just done. And for Shen Qiao to say, I am not a disciple of Zhandu Mountain. I'm a disciple of Qifengge, which you are not, because everything you're doing is going against our master's wishes. So how could you be a master to him? But I am. But Zhandu Mountain is no longer a sect that is going under the principles of Qifengge. Like, that was crazy. He's like, I'm never not going to be Qifengge's disciple. No matter where I am, who I support, that will never change. But you are no longer worthy of being Qifengge's disciple. That is crazy. That is wild. And the fact that Shen Qiao is saying this in front of everyone is crazy. Because he tells everything. He talks about the fall, about the poisoning, about all the manipulation. He lets it all air out because he's just done. And he's like, I don't have any evidence. I can't prove this. But we all know how this gossip mill goes. Everybody's going to tell everybody. Everybody's going to know about UI by the end of this chapter set. Literally. And he's like, I just don't care anymore. He's like, I'm tired of all this manipulation. I love that line, UI still felt like his clothes had been stripped off, leaving him naked. That's such a good line. And so he's like, well, come back with me. And Shen Qiao is like, you know that the Gok Turks stand for everything we did not stand for with Qifengge. Why would you support them? And he's like, let everybody be our witness. He's like, as Qifengge's successor, you are no longer his disciple. Like, that's like Jesus telling Judas to F off. Like, that's literally what that's like. That is insane. That is crazy. That just, Shen Qiao, my dude. And the way he says it, where he's not yelling and he's not showing the madness, but he has this fierceness to him that's just blinding. I loved this scene so much. And he's like, I am my Shizun's only mantle disciple. My will is his will. Honestly, Yan Wushi would have been so proud of him. Yan Wushi would have been up against that wall going, yeah. Like, that's what he would have done. And the fact that he says that he is, Qifengge's mantle disciple, it's like in that moment Shen Qiao is taking up the mantle of being, Qifengge's true successor. And in my mind, as I was reading, I was like, oh, Yan Wushi's going to love this. Because he's been looking for somebody that's going to measure up to Qifengge. Well, in terms of integrity and justice, Shen Qiao's doing it. So that's so crazy. I love it. He's like, you have no right to punish me. Because none of Zhandu Mountain's forefathers will ever acknowledge you as a sect leader. And I love that he basically became Glinda and Wicked and being like, I hope you're happy now. I just basically starts the beginning of Defying Gravity, where Shen Qiao's like, I hope that you're happy now that you've chosen this. And you're going to have to deal with the consequences of your actions. And everybody there is just like, this is the most scandalous thing we've heard in all the volumes so far. Shen Qiao just let him have it. Shen Qiao is just like, I'm done. Say what you want. And I loved at the end where when he was leaving and the guys were starting to gossip again, he's like, say what you want. Go ahead, gossip. I know the truth. He's like, so I ain't gonna be bothered by any of y'all. Our boy. Meanwhile, Do Yanshan's like, hey. He's like, I couldn't help but notice you guys were having some complications and I wouldn't normally get in and butt in, but you guys kind of, he's paying for my tab. And then Qin Gong gets involved. It was just so much, but like the snarling and the swords clanging, and then Dao and Qin Gong get involved. It was such a good chapter. And UI tries to like hold Shen Qiao back, and nobody puts baby in a corner and nobody holds Shen Qiao back. Absolutely not. Like, our boy, He was just like, nah, I'm done. And granted, Shen Qiao recognizes that he can barely fight UI. Like, it's not a lot. It's not enough to, like, totally overwhelm him. But he manages to scare him off. He knows that Do is not quite, convinced as UI is. But he's like, I'm not gonna back down. I'm just gonna make it look like I've got this under control, and maybe they'll leave me alone, and then I can go back and help Yan Wushi, and we'll go from there. But I love that. I love that Shen Qiao had tried not to fight UI the entire time, and then whenever he finally was attacked, he didn't retreat. Instead, he took out his sword and unsheathed it, and I love that it flashed forth like silk, and then just attacked UI's sword. I wanted to see it animated, damn it. I wanted to see pictures of it. I wanted to see fan art of it. If y'all know any fan art of this scene, please share it to the Discord, because I need to see this. I need to see this, like, what people have drawn this scene looking like. It was so good. And then finally UI just kind of gives up, and he's like, fine. And that's when he tries to, like, I love that he basically tells Shen Qiao, he's like, you should come back to Jiandu Mountain. And Shen Qiao's like, I'm still Shen Qiao at the end of the day. I'm still Qi Fengge's disciple. Even if I'm not associated with Jiandu Mountain, I'm still who I am. But he basically tells UI, he's like, you've made yourself tied to all this. And that's your business now. And for UI to say, like I was feeling a little bad for UI, because I was feeling a little bad for him, because I do think he genuinely likes Shen Qiao. I think he made a huge mistake. He's like Job off Arrested Development. I've made a huge mistake. I think he screwed up royally, and he realizes that, and he's been trying to compensate from it, and Shen Qiao's just like, nope. But the moment he said, Yan Ying and Hingbo miss you very much and wish for your return, I'm like, you just fought him! You just fought Shen Qiao and tried to attack him, and now you're saying that, oh, your friends miss you. And so when Shen Qiao's like, you poisoned me with Joyful Reunion, I don't believe anything you say, I don't blame him. And when he says, well, for starting from now, I'll never hurt you again, Shen Qiao's like, what's the point? He's like, I can't believe you. And he's like, I don't want, and I love that he just lays it all out in the line. He's like, I don't even want to go to Jiandu Mountain anymore. It's not my home anymore. You've ruined it. You've lied in bed with the Gok Turks. You've made all these promises. You've accepted all these things that are completely against what my master and I believed in. He's like, no. He's like, you prepare for the consequences, and the day that you can no longer bear them, I'll come find you myself. And UI just to be like, fine. In the audio drama, he goes, fine. Fine. Like, they just basically have, if they didn't have a breakup before, this was the public breakup. This is it. Yeah. Shen Qiao was just like, nope. And there's a part of me that still feels a little bad for UI, but there's another part of me being like, dude. Again, Yan Wushi, he's an asshole, but he's a very honest asshole. UI is just two-faced, and that's even worse. So yeah, I love that Dao Yanshan's like, he rubs his nose. He's like, congratulations on getting your martial arts back, Master Shen. I do think that Shen Qiao is correct that Do Yanshan doesn't quite believe that he's back to 100% strength. He's a little skeptical, so he sticks around so that he won't immediately follow him back. Because again, we don't want Yan Wushi to be found out that he's still alive. And I think that I do think it is a little suspicious. I think Dao Yanshan's onto him, because when he tells him, he's like, we need to give him a proper burial, and so if you need help, we can transport him back to Chang'an, to his guild and his sect. And Shen Qiao's like, oh, I've already buried him. It's, I only retrieved him because he's like, he should have already... Shen Qiao kind of contradicts himself in this statement. At the same time, he says, oh, well, he knew this was what was going to happen if he fought here, so it's not my fault I buried him in a dishonorable place. But, I only brought his body there to bury him in this not quite right state because I was his friend. The statements kind of contradict each other a little bit, and I feel like Shen Qiao might know that. He knows that they might be onto him because of that. And Dao's tries to probe, but it doesn't work. So, yeah. And then as everyone is starting to gossip, he's like, your words are yours alone. And I love how he's like, you can come after me. You can say all you want about me. You can say all you want about me being Yan Wushi's boy toy. I don't care. But if you come after my former sect or Chifunge, I will make you see this sword and you will not like it. I was like, again, if Yan Wushi could only have seen him now, if Yan Wushi could have seen him, I just, And the thing is, again, Yan Wushi would have been so proud of Shen Qiao in this moment, because Shen Qiao is like, I have been nice, I have been gentle, I have been a pushover. He's like, and I have stood up for my beliefs, and y'all have still walked on top of me. And he's like, no. He's like, I have come to realize in walking around with Yan Wushi that some of y'all will not listen to reason, and I'm going to have to put my foot down to get you to listen. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, Shen Qiao's like, if you want to play the game, I'll play the game. And which is very different from how he was in Volume 1. And is kind of something that Yan Wushi has been trying to... I feel like Shen Qiao is doing the Goldilocks scenario with it, because Yan Wushi has been trying to drill into his head that everyone is evil and out to get him. And I feel like Shen Qiao replies with that in this chapter set by being like, okay, fine. I will concede that some people I'm going to have to be a little forceful with. That I can't just let them walk all over me, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to help you if they're walking all over me. But at the same time, like, he's still Shen Qiao. He's still who he is. He still has a sense of justice, but he's a little bit more firm. And I think that Yan Wushi was trying to convince him of that. He doesn't believe everybody's evil, but he knows that some people have to be dealt with in different ways. Just what a wild transformation. And so, yeah. So then he goes back, and that's when Bana's like, Grandpa's not home. That living dead man is awake. And then we leave on the freaking cliffhanger of all mother trucking cliffhangers. Oh my God. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it. Y'all, this chapter set, Shen Qiao, my boy, I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of him, but I'm also like, damn, he is... And I kind of like that. I feel like you could argue with Shen Qiao. Sure. You could argue maybe he was being hypocritical. You could argue that. I would not disagree with you necessarily. You could argue he's being a little hypocritical, or he's being a little bit giving preference to Yan Wushi perhaps in some scenarios. But I kind of like that Shen Qiao is not perfect. There are moments where he does seem like Jesus, like he seems like a messiah, but then there are other parts where I'm like, no, you're just a human being and you're pretty flawed, but you have a strong conviction, and he has a strong desire to like make sure that things happen the way that he wants them to happen, and I love it. It's so good. It's so good. But anyway, this chapter set has invigorated me. I am like on fire. It's so much fun. I'm so excited because I don't know what's going to happen next. I have no clue. So I can't wait to see what's going to go down next week. We're going to be looking at chapters 59, 60, and 61 and episode 15 of the audio drama. I cannot wait. I hope you all enjoyed this chapter set. I hope you all enjoyed these readings. I cannot wait to hear your thoughts down below, but please no spoilers. I can say that finally. Please no spoilers. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of Thousand Autumns. Bye.